Come in and talk about who votes and who doesn't vote, which of course matters a lot. It's one thing to have a lot of support, but if people don't show up to vote, it doesn't really help you. Suffrage means the legal right to vote. It sounds bad, but it's good. This has been extended over through the course of American history. Obviously, the 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment gave everyone over the age of 18, the right to vote. And it's worth pointing out that even without amendments, we had seen the right to vote expand from the beginning to basically property-holding males, to all white males during the time of Andrew Jackson. So really every few generations we get a significant expansion in turnout. We have low voter turnout compared to other democracies around the world. The political scientist Downs will argue it's not rational to vote. For one thing, you have to see a clear difference between the candidates. If you feel like the candidates are the same, there's a lot of talk about this in 2000 when Bush and Gore ran against each other. In retrospect, I don't think many people see them as the same, but during the election they certainly did. If you feel the candidates are very similar and neither one represents your point of view, you have very little incentive to vote. Why else might you vote? Well, you might vote because you think it might affect the election, but it's statistically very unlikely that your one vote will affect the election, although if all the people who fit into your demographic categories voted, that can affect the election, certainly. But, we've talked in class about how voting for president in the state of Texas, in these current days anyway, has almost no chance of affecting the outcome of the presidential race. Some people vote, and I hope you do, because you see it as your duty. You see it as part of your responsibilities as being a citizen of this nation. Now, all that being said, I always vote, and I really do think you should too. You see here the decline in turnout. If you go back to 1900, you can look at almost 80% of eligible voters voted. And in 1996, you can see that number falls below 50%, and that's in a presidential election. Now, the last few elections have been a little better, getting up into the around 60%, but still, of course, lower than most countries around the world and lower than the 1800s. In order to vote, you need to register. This is a system adopted by the states. It requires you to go sign up before you vote. Some states have same-day registration, meaning you can walk up, register, and vote at the same time. But most states are going to have a window, usually 30 days or so, that you need to register before you're allowed to vote. Registration differs state to state. And, of course, lately, attempts to change these laws to make it harder to register, attach crimes to not following procedures when you're registering other people and the like, have been passed primarily by Republicans who seem to be seeking to decrease voter turnout. Although they would claim they're trying to prevent fraud, although they openly acknowledge and did so in the court case about this, that there's no evidence of fraud that this would prevent. The Motor Voter Act, which was passed in 1993 under the Clinton administration, requires states to allow you to check a box and register to vote when you get your driver's license. Since Democrats tend to benefit from higher turnout, it makes sense. This was passed in 93 with a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president who were trying to increase the amount of voter registration in the country. Who votes? The more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. This is the single most important factor. More important than everything else is education. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. So older people with a lot of education are very likely to vote. While it is technically true that whites are more likely to vote, this is only because whites are more likely to have higher degrees of education and higher incomes. If you factor out education and income, minorities actually vote at a higher rate. So a black man, let's say, with the same level of education and the same income as a white man, the black guy is actually more statistically likely to vote. So while race does appear to be a factor at first glance, in reality isn't much of a factor. It's more education and age. Gender, women are more likely to vote as well. These stack, by the way, so you can add them up. If you're an old white woman with a PhD, you're almost certainly going to vote. Marital status. The married are more likely to vote than the single, for whatever reason. Union membership. If you're a union member, you're more likely to vote. Unions tend to do a lot of give out a lot of political information to their members and strongly encourage them to vote. And as I said, these are cumulative. I've wondered, and this is just my musings, if things like these days Twitter and maybe Facebook to some extent are not going to increase voter turnout. My guess is on election day, when you pull out your cell phones, you're going to be reminded to vote endlessly by everybody you know. And I've wondered if that's going to have some impact on turnout. I don't know. We'll see. Here's a little chart you can pause and look at, basically correlating whether or not people vote with their demographic characteristics.